Holly Yokley, at this time, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Evening, everybody. Like all of you know, we've been working on this UDO now for, geez, I think Cheryl and I started talking about it over 3 years ago. So we now have a complete draft. The goal of this UDO was just to streamline the current ordinances, to make them more user-friendly, implement some more modern planning standards, to attract more modern style development, and just generally make it easier for developers to do business in town and easier for staff to interpret and enforce the ordinance, to get the desired outcome for Oxford. So I'll give the easiest way I know to do this is just give you a quick rundown of the chapters, what's in them. I will talk about the different zoning districts we have when we get to chapter 2, because that's probably one of the most important things y'all want to hear about, and then give you kind of a high level overview of the different chapters and what's addressed in them. And then we can move to specific questions that anybody has about provisions or concerns. So starting with chapter 1, this is really just the foundation chapter, sets the basis for the UDO. There's not a lot of exciting stuff in here, so I'll just keep moving past this chapter. Chapter 2 is sort of, it's the meat of the story. If this was a book and you didn't have chapter 2, you'd have no idea what's going on. So this is the heart of everything. This is where we talk about zoning districts, permitted uses in each zoning district, and dimensional standards for those zoning districts. This will cause the area of biggest change for you guys. We will put together or change your zoning map to the new zoning districts prior to the next board review. We just wanted to get through this meeting to make sure that everybody was comfortable with the districts we have before we put that map together for you. But just generally, your RA district, residential agriculture, that stays the same. That's your large lot, mostly outside of town, just waiting for somebody to do something with it type zoning district. Your R25 and R15 become GR3, which is 3 units to the acre. The thought there being that we would regulate by units to the acre rather than lot size, because what's really the difference between a 15,000 square foot and a 25,000 square foot lot? There's really not much from looking at it at the street. So we will regulate by density. We do have minimum lot sizes and setbacks in here, but overall the design of the district is based on units per acre. So R25, R15 become GR3, R8 and R6 become GR5, which is 5 units to the acre. Then we're introducing a GR10, which is 10 units to the acre. It's like 4,500 square foot lots typically, but it could be bigger lots with that density, just depending. It gives flexibility for design of residential subdivisions. Office institutional stays the same. We're introducing a neighborhood business district, which I believe is probably close to your B3, but it's new, nothing specifically like that now. B2 and B3, or the highway business becomes HB instead of B2. The idea here being for your commercial districts, we want the name to match what the purpose of the district is rather than a letter and a number. That could be up to guests. So HB highway business is what becomes a B2. The I1 corporate park becomes IPD, industrial park district. The I2 becomes LI light industrial, and I3 heavy industrial becomes just HI heavy industrial. We're also introducing 3 new form-based district and retitling a 4th. Downtown is currently zoned B1, the Central Business District. We're just going to call it CBD, the Central Business District, because that's what it is. Then we're also introducing 3 new districts that the current ordinance doesn't have, and those are your mixed use districts. That's residential mixed use, neighborhood mixed use, and commercial mixed use. And these districts do away with your typical zoning requirements as far as lot size and those typical dimensional standards, and focus more on the relation of buildings to each other and to the public space. So they allow flexibility in uses, flexibility in design, lots of flexibility, but in return you get higher quality development. They have to commit to higher standards. They provide better landscaping, more open space, and better design standards. Any specific questions on those zoning districts generally? Well, I guess any general questions about those zoning districts?
No.
Okay. So moving on, in chapter 2, we're also introducing conservation development standards that are allowed in the residential agricultural district, the GR districts, and the O&I districts. This encourages more set-asides for sensitive environmental open spaces and just general open spaces in exchange for no lot sizes and different, they get to design a little bit differently. They don't get more density, but they get more flexibility, if that makes any sense. We have our permitted use table. We've updated this to be more current with the language that is used now. It's clearer. We don't have, 3 different use categories for essentially the same use with or without a driveway, things like that. We just lump stuff together so it's easier to understand for the staff to interpret and enforce, and for residents and developers to understand what's allowed and what's not. We do have some overlay districts. Those are from the town's comprehensive plan. Those limits were set by the town's plan. The uses are specific to those overlay districts. If you look at the permitted use table, to intending to keep the character of those specific neighborhoods and areas. Those are the historic preservation overlay, which the town already has. The highway overlay district, which is, if you look on page 21, or it's 36 of the PDF or page 21 of the actual UDO, you can see the limits of the highway overlay district. There's the College Street overlay. There's 1 and 2. Those are generally commercial and residential uses, respectively. And then you've got your Lake Devon watershed overlay. Any questions about those overlays at all?
No.
And another thing that we're introducing is conditional zoning districts. Those are not new to North Carolina, but they are new to general statutes starting in July. This is a tool that's been used statewide. Effectively, it gives elected officials the opportunity to approve with conditions agreed to by the applicant. So if it's a development and it's in a spot where you just feel like this needs higher architectural standards, and the applicant is willing to agree to do crawl-space construction with hardy plank siding, then they could agree to that condition as part of the zoning, and it applies to that specific development into the future. That's now it's in the new planning legislation 160D. Officially, it's always kind of been done because judges said it was okay, but it's official now, and so Oxford will have this tool in their UDO. It also gives the applicant the option to change any standard that's listed in the ordinance as being able to change. So it gives some flexibility for developers and staff when usually these are applied when you have a situation where a lot almost works for what you want to do with it, but you need some flexibility and there's a way around it. Some design standards, some agreement to particular increases that the developer will agree to in exchange for maybe a reduced setback or something. That's where this comes in really handy. And so that's the size of chapter 2. No questions there so far. We'll go to chapter 3.
Now, I have one for 2.
Yes, sir.
This is George Summers.
Yes, sir.
On page 26, a couple places on here confuse me. It says under the highway overlay district, 2.5.3, applicability. The 4th one down, I think I know where you're talking about, but I'm not positive. Roxborough Road, Business 158, from Oxford Elementary School to Oxford Children's Home. Is that West Oxford Elementary and the Masonic Home for Children?
That was pulled directly from the master plan. Cheryl, I'd have to ask you, were that the specific schools that it was talking about?
Please go over that section again. What was that?
253A.
2.5.3. The 4th applicability down. Roxborough Road from Oxford Elementary School to Oxford Children's Home. Is that West Oxford Elementary and the Masonic Home for Children?
It is.
West Oxford Elementary, I can update that so it's clear.
West Oxford Elementary and the Masonic Home for Children.
Yes, sir.
Right.
That was my only question from this section.
I had one, Charlie, if it's okay.
Yeah.
The conditional zoning districts, does that come in when someone wants to apply for a new zoning, or they come in for a special consideration in the existing zoning they have?
It is a new zoning. And a conditional district zone, if it's approved, becomes a specific zone to a specific piece of property.
So if you were in a office institutional zone, but you wanted to do a conditional district commercial of some sort, neighborhood business, is that, tell us, that's what tell us the difference between that and coming in as a special use district in the same zone.
Okay, so first of all, special use districts will have to go away when 160D is adopted. They're left in this UDO now just because they're a tool that it can be used until July. But when the 160D version of this ordinance is done, the special use districts have to go away. Special use districts, the difference between a conditional district is it's a new zoning. So say there's, we'll just use a hypothetical piece of property. Say you have a 100-acre piece of property that's zoned RA on the outside of town. Needs to be annexed, but the applicant wants to do, that the lot sizes they want to do all meet the requirements of the district, but they want to do smaller setbacks to give them a little more flexibility in home design. In exchange, they say, because we're going to do smaller setbacks, homes will be closer together, might be closer to the street, we're willing to do higher quality materials. We'll do hardy plank, raised or a crawl space construction. You know, we'll throw everything at it. So they agree to that specific condition to GR10. So they become GR10 conditional district. And their specific district says that their front setback is 15 feet, their side setback is 5 feet, and they have to provide higher quality materials. What they can't do is say, hey, I've got this RA district out here, it's 100 acres. I want to do 5,000 square foot lots. Can I do a RA conditional district and just get a conditional district permit and develop the property? You can't do that. You cannot, so you can't change the use that's allowed in the zoning district. And if you look on page 31 of the ordinance, there's a table at the top of that page that tells you what can and cannot be altered in that section by a conditional district. So for example, supplemental use standards, you know, those specific standards to specific uses in locations like taverns in highway business can't be so far from different uses. And if you look at that table, that specific standard cannot be altered by a conditional district. It's mainly for getting more from a developer in exchange for a reduction on their part for a lot size, a setback, something like that.
Will the current special use districts be mapped as conditional districts?
What we probably, that'll be something we'll have to look at, but probably, that's probably the cleanest way to do it because there's conditions likely attached to those approvals. You just call it a conditional district.
And we only have a small area now designated as a special use district. And I'll go with that with you.
Just
is
like
there-
one.
Pardon me?
Is there a use on that lot? Is it developed?
Yes, it was
Okay.
it's a one is like a little office. Most of it is offices.
Okay,
That's
so
right.
that's easy enough to fix. We can O&I conditional district that and
Right.
just make sure that it's referenced as the special use permit that was approved.
Okay. And I'll send you that information.
Okay,
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks.
any other questions on chapter 2?
Charlie, I have a question. On page 18 on the charts, it says open air retail for the downtown business district. There's a line through that, as well as outside sales and displays. There's a line through that. Is that not permitted?
Yeah, open air retail, CBD. That's right. They would not be permitted the way that this is written right now.
And you couldn't have pop-up vendors in the downtown area.
And you couldn't have one that didn't meet a different use category. If it was a temporary use in Chapter 3, then it would be allowed to happen. I think what an open air retail, so let's look at the definitions of that.
And that's the way it currently is now.
Well, but we are allowed outside sales and displays.
Under certain conditions, you certainly, for the businesses that are there, I think they're talking about non-business owners as an accessory use.
So what that's talking, let me read you the definition of outside sales and display, outside or display sales. It says the sale of goods and products outside of a permanent structure that are clearly related to the function contained in that structure. This includes, but is not limited to, landscape materials, lawn and garden supplies, and produce. So this is, the reason it's not permitted is we want to avoid what happens in front of like a Lowe's Home Improvement, where you stack a row of 35 lawnmowers out front for people to walk around. We don't want that downtown. So I think that's the idea. And we can change it. I just write it. I'll write it for whatever you guys want to do. So if y'all have a conversation, I'll be glad to update it if need be.
Well, Cheryl, I think we have a downtown business that puts lawnmowers outside, the Rent-A-Center or whatever one, I can't think of one on College Street. They put some stuff outside.
It's
Have we ever had a
Schultz.
problem with that?
Do I have a problem with it? Not the way that the current ordinance is written.
But that's what I'm saying. He was just saying.
Right, that
would not be permitted now.
Are they in the CBD district or are they just downtown?
They're in downtown.
And they would be in the CBD district.
Yeah.
It's Schultz.
Yeah, Schultz, that's right. I couldn't think of the name. Mhm. Is this something we need to think about, or?
Would it matter that theirs is temporary for the day and that they bring it in at night? Whereas one like Lowe's that he was talking of, they leave it out 24/7.
The only thing I will say as the consultant here, just to talk about things I've run into, is you want to be protective of that sidewalk space downtown. So anything you can do to protect that for pedestrians is a good thing.
But our current ordinance, did we not pass something several years ago to allow for sidewalk displays? Cheryl?
We did amend the code of ordinance for that, and all of the information goes to the Economic Development Director for downtown for approval.
So does this work in concert with our ordinance, or does this add additional restrictions?
It probably gonna add additional restrictions. I would say leave it as it is. Everything goes through the downtown director for any type of outdoor display.
I think the CBD uses still really should be reviewed by the downtown business owners and the DOEDC if that hasn't happened, because there are some in like hotels and things in there that we might want to make sure we look at from a development standpoint. I don't know if that's happened yet. If it has, then those are exactly the questions that would be helpful from the downtown folks.
If we're talking about outside, what's the difference between a restaurant and somebody like Schultz who puts that lawnmower out there? Because we are, now in some cases encouraging, sidewalk dining.
Is it possible, that's a great point, George, is it possible to put it as a permitted with standards, which then routes it more specifically through whether it's downtown EDC or the planning department?
I think that since the downtown director works so closely with all of the merchants and business owners, it should stay with her.
But if it was changed to a PS instead of just a line, would that be more likely to route it through?
So let me ask a question. So does economic development have to approve a permit for outside sales and display downtown?
Yes,
Okay, would you be comfortable if we put that, if we made it a PS and just had that as the standard?
Yeah.
Okay, is it Oxford? What's the name of the group?
where the person who is included in the meeting is our downtown director.
What is it, the Oxford, what's the name of the downtown organization that would approve the permit?
The EOC, DC?
Well, and it's not the organization that approves it. The permit, the way that it's written in chapter 18 right now is there is a form that they fill out if they're going to have something on the sidewalk to display or sell. And that information comes directly to me, Charlie, as the downtown development director. It does not go to the DOEDC for approval. That's not the way that is written.
Okay,
Currently.
we'll make it a PS and we'll put it, the standard is that a permit for outside sales and display must be approved by the downtown development director. Does that work for everybody?
Works for me.
Okay, I'll make
Works
that.
for me. That's simple.
All right. Any more questions on chapter 2? Okay, going to chapter 3, this is the permitted use. No, this is the supplemental use standard chapter. So every use, some uses are permitted. We just allow them to go onto the lot in that zoning district. Some uses are permitted with standards, meaning we're okay with them going there, but you have to meet specific standards associated with that use. There were some questions asked early on. Not early. There were some questions asked that Cheryl sent me over email. And one of those was like the supplemental use standard for bar, tavern, and nightclub brewery. Looks like we grouped those standards, supplemental use standards, in the downtown district with other districts where that could be complicating since we allow residential uses downtown. So we'll get that updated before your next review. We went in depth here about temporary uses to clear that up for when somebody wants to do a temporary use, because those can kind of be complicated to figure out. So we tried to give as much clarity as we could. But otherwise, most of these solar farms standards are new, but most of these are taken from the current ordinance and just updated. So any questions on chapter 3? Is a lot to go through page by page. So.
Charlie,
Yeah, I
could you
had one.
point?
Go ahead.
Go on, George.
No, I had one on, in looking through here, there's a section for manufactured home park, which I take to be in the old language, a trailer park.
Yes, sir.
But I don't see anything anywhere, and I know we don't have one now, but for an RV park. Temporary overnight camper parking. If we're going to try and attract more tourists, somebody may want to open a campground for RVs. And I don't see anything in here relating to that use.
Just a second.
Thought we had something.
Yeah, I think we have campgrounds.
I think so too.
I didn't see one. Maybe I'm overlooked it.
And I could be misremembering. Let me see. Just a second.
There's something on bed and breakfast and short-term vacation rentals, and boarding houses. Like I say, I know we don't have one now, but somebody may want to put one in if we get more tourists.
Yep. I'm just double checking to make sure campground's not in there, because if not, that's an easy add. Or RV park even. Yeah, it's not in there. So that's a good idea. We'll add that to the, now with that, you want that permitted? Where would y'all be comfortable with that being permitted?
I just saw it wasn't there. I don't know
Okay.
where it being permitted. Maybe Cheryl could give us a better idea.
Yeah, I would think that's
Know about
RA.
being downtown.
Yeah, I think that's RA, sort of on the outskirts. So I'll take a look at that.
There is on section 3.2.1 E, it does mention manufactured housing, campers, recreational vehicles, etc., which includes campers and travel trailers. That's
What page is that, John?
I've got it on, it's chapter 3 on page 3. It's 3.2.1. And if you go down to E on there,
Mhm.
Yeah, that's just a prohibition on using those
Yeah.
as accessory structures.
it does mention campers and travel trailers. I know we spoke about this a while ago.
I see something in 3.5.4. And it says temporary recreational vehicle or travel trailer.
3.5.4.
Page 53. I don't know if I'm in the right.
I don't know.
All right.
I've got 3.5.4 is internet sweepstakes. I've got,
That's what I have on 3.5.
Me too.
yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, it's 3.5 that it's in temporary uses. That's 3.511.
Oh,
Oh, I'm
3.5.
sorry,
That's okay.
3.511, paragraph 4. I
Oh, all right.
apologize.
There we go. Yep. I've got
And
it.
that's for use as like an office. That's for your modular
Oh,
office.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't talk about specifically as a campground or an RV campground. So that's something we can put in here.
Okay.
And I'm just full of questions.
Good.
Charlie,
Under-
what about the, on page 51 in that table?
Those are,
At the bottom, next to the bottom?
where it says temporary uses associated with construction. Which one are you talking about?
Yeah, so this is on page 51 in the table, next to the last one.
Where it says temporary use recreational vehicle or travel trailer.
Yes,
Yeah, so that's 3.511.4. That's what we were just talking about.
okay,
You can use it as like a office for your construction site, but you can't live in it.
okay.
I had another one here. I see personal services on page 42 as far as restricted. Now, I'm not seeing any reference to personal services in any other place in here. And of course, the definition of that was beauty salons, barbershops, et cetera, et cetera. And like I said, I can't find anywhere in any of the charts where personal services are listed except restricted personal services.
Are you on, you said page 40?
42 is where I picked up on the start of this, where it says personal services restricted.
Yes.
But that's
There-
on
I
40.
went back to the whole thing. I couldn't find anywhere other than the definition page where personal services is shown as can be permitted or unpermitted.
Well, let me look at
Can't
that.
find it anywhere.
think it's on page 17.
It is. It's on page 16 in the table there. The office service in chapter 2. There's personal services and personal services restricted.
Oh, okay. My bad. I missed.
It's 333 pages of words, George. It's okay. Any other questions in chapter 3? Any of the supplemental use standards? Like I said, I saw the question about some potential complications in the downtown district that will get updated.
Yeah, I have one more question on 3.
Yes.
Are we grandfathering in old approved permits and approvals, or is this going to be straight out? And I'm looking at page 49, special events facilities. And they have all sorts of requirements for right-of-ways and parking and all this sort of thing. And somewhere on there, one parking attendant on duty, et cetera, et cetera. Someplace like the Orpheum does not have that. And that is a special use place, facility, or it's a special events facility that currently is approved, but would not be approved under this new.
So it would be considered a legal non-conforming use. They'd be allowed to continue unless y'all wanted to amortize that particular use. So they could continue, they'd be allowed to continue. The only time that there might be an issue with them having to bring it up to current standards is if damaged, as defined in chapter 13, the nonconformities chapter, and then having to be brought up to current standards.
Things will be grandfathered in and already.
Yes, sir. That's right. We don't want to create more problems.
I have the same question for 3.4.3 when we're talking about the personal services facilities, because if you go downtown at the intersection of, like, say, College Street and Hillsborough, you have multiple barbershops and they're within, like, say, 1,000 feet of a bail bondsman. So
Well, that's not a personal service. That's a restricted personal service.
restricted. So they wouldn't be affected at all.
No, sir.
Okay. And then
Barbershops are restricted?
just one other quick observation to make sure that I'm clear, because on the corner there's Uptown 101, I think is the name of the restaurant. And before the pandemic, they started to have outside dining. And given the way this draft is presented, this would not affect that restaurant. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Larry.
Are you saying that haircut barbershops and what have you are restricted?
No, sir. No, they're not restricted. So this supplemental use standard in 341 would not apply to them. Or 342, sorry. Barbershops, accounting offices, things like that are considered personal services, that's personal service. So personal service restricted is, if you look at the definition, like bail bondsman, things like that. Any other questions in chapter 3?
I know you mentioned the discrepancy between the guideline for the distance requirement between bars and taverns and residential, but do we know how we're going to resolve that, given that we are hoping to, I know you said you were going to adjust it because we want to encourage upper story residential in our downtown, but do you have a thought of how you're going to adjust that?
Sure. Yeah, those separation standards won't apply downtown.
Okay,
They just won't apply in CBD.
great. Thank you.
No problem. Anything else? Okay, on to chapter 4. This is one of the more boring chapters, thankfully, after the run of chapters here. This just gives basic standards for ways that lots are measured, setbacks are measured, how many lots you can have on a building, just things like that. It's process and definition of measurement, essentially is what chapter 4 is. So is there anything in chapter 4? See something? Okay. Anything in chapter 4 that anybody wanted to talk about? I didn't think so.
I had one more in chapter 3, and I'm so sorry, but
No, it's good.
the backyard chicken coops are a permitted use in the CBD, and single family is not. I'm not sure. We just need to think about that.
Yeah, that
No roosters, I know, are allowed, but I'm not sure if that's a thing we want to put downtown necessarily. We don't allow single family downtown, and
yeah.
so
That's a good
it's
point.
thought.
I can
It's a
fix
thought.
that.
Okay.
I probably just got.
I personally would love some chickens downtown, but I don't think it's a great idea.
I probably just got excited with the capital P's there.
Thanks.
And then chapter 5, this is your building and site design standards. So these requirements are related to mostly to the architecture of buildings, and then some sort of design criteria related to location of parking and stuff like that. This is very new to you guys. The current ordinance doesn't have anything like that. This chapter is broken up into the design standards for buildings in the new form-based districts and then buildings in the rural and suburban districts. That in the form-based districts, the regulations applicable to the building depend on the way the building addresses the street. So whether it has a storefront, which is like the flat glass with a awning, there are design standards for a storefront building. If it's an arcade where you have a covered area over the front door, but it's not a canopy, just kind of an inset door, there's standards for that. There's 5 different kinds of buildings and the way they address the street. And then there's specific design criteria related to each of those types. Those criteria are setbacks, building heights, things like that. The width of the front of the building across the street relative to the lot size, lot width, all of those things are important because they address the way the building interacts with the public realm. So that's why we have these controls in the form-based districts, because we want to make sure that we manage that area well, because that's the most important spot in a form-based district is the street. So that's what all of these standards are for.
Will our new map have assigned form-based districts in it?
Probably not, except for downtown.
Okay.
They'll be unmapped, and if somebody wants to use them, then they can apply. And then we have standards for the rural and suburban districts. They're not nearly as stringent. They're not nearly as detailed because we're not quite as concerned. We care about what the building looks like, but we're not as concerned with its location relative to the street. So we do require high quality materials, but we require the building have a base body and cap. All of those traditional sort of architectural features are there, but this isn't nearly as involved as your form-based districts. Residential structures, we can't legally regulate the appearance of residential structures. However, these standards are still in here because applicants can voluntarily commit to meeting these standards. So we can have them, we just can't enforce them unless the applicant agrees by conditional district approval. So that's what these are. I'd say that just so everybody understands that every house does not have to meet these requirements in the future. Only those new residential buildings that were approved with a conditional district zoning and committed to these standards or some of these standards would have to comply with this chapter or this section. That is for single family and townhomes. Apartments, you can hold to the standards in the non-residential or the rural and suburban district, chapter 5. Only single family and townhomes can't be regulated according to the state.
So Charlie, you're talking about what's in chapter 5.4.2?
Yes, ma'am. That's
Okay,
right. And it says in there, the first sentence has in there that 1 and 2 family dwellings are exempt from these regulations unless located, blah, blah, blah. So it's clear in there that can't be enforced unless consent of the owner at the time of application for zoning map amendment.
Charlie, do you find that subdivisions that come in, larger subdivisions, apply for conditional zoning to do a form-based standard so they don't have to go through all that architectural interior stuff?
Do they apply? Do they not apply for the form-based, you mean?
Or can they apply for the form-based district to address that issue?
So here's how it works. Here's how it's going to work in the future for these conditional districts and these architectural standards. Developer's going to show up, the same 100 acres that we've been pretending exists, we've been talking about. And they're going to say, look, I want to do GR5 development here. I'm going to get 350 lots. So I want to go conditional district GR5. What's going to happen is you're going to say, that's great. We're really excited that you're here. You need to look at chapter 5.4.2 and figure out what sections you want to agree with and put those in your conditions. That's just the way it's going to work. They're going to agree because they want to get approved. So that's how it'll be done.
And if they're single family or small lot, single family or townhome, then the enforcement of that restriction will be the city's enforcement.
Right. So they'll do,
Okay.
they'll apply for the zoning. They'll agree to some or all of 5.4.2. Once it's approved, then every building permit that comes in, if they had to commit to these and there's specific standards in here, has to be reviewed against these standards to make sure that they're compliant. So yes.
What if somebody wants to modify a residential structure from, like, say, a 1 and 2 family dwelling, and say they want to just totally gut it out and make it into like a 4-play? Would that, what standards would apply in that?
That would be a multifamily dwelling. So the architectural standards would apply.
Okay,
That's not 1 or 2 family anymore.
okay.
Anything else on this chapter? All right, chapter 6 is long and involved. This is staff's chapter. This is all of the standards for streets, utilities, traffic impact analysis, subdivisions, utility connections. This is a long and dry chapter, but I couldn't possibly go over every section in here, but needless, this is the subdivision and infrastructure standards. So if you're going to build a new development in Oxford, then it has to, everything that's built is addressed in chapter 6, and everything that's built has to be built in accordance with chapter 6 and any other standards town has. Was there anything in chapter 6 that you guys were concerned about or questions about?
No question, just a little bit of nitpicking. On page 136, the spec graph does not coincide with the drawing as far as the total width.
Page 136?
Yeah,
Is it alleys? Which one? Which?
no, the rural 2-lane street. 8-1 or B1, I'm sorry. Shows 45 feet for the width of the street in the drawing, but in the spec graph, it shows 46 feet.
Yeah, that's a typo. I'll fix that.
Just a nitpicking thing.
Yep, I appreciate that. Okay, I'll fix that. Anything else in this chapter?
I don't see a rural two-lane street graph. And I'm,
It's on page 128.
oh, okay, thank you. Thank you.
No problem.
On my sheet, it's page 136.
That's weird because 136 doesn't have any charts on. I don't think anybody else has. That's strange.
Yeah, 135 and 136 is,
6.12.6, City of Oxford Street classification.
Yeah, mine has the same thing that George does.
Okay.
I do
Likewise.
too. I
Okay.
have-
Okay.
Mine too. It has a mhm.
And it may have been the way we printed it to
Yeah.
save paper.
Yep. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, Cheryl, that's what I was thinking. It's just the way the pages lined up.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. And this one does address, engineering was concerned early on about utility allocations going to developers and them never doing anything with them and clogging up the system. So there is a new standard and process in here for that. So it can be kicked out if nobody uses it and if they're just hogging allocation that they're not using. So
What
That's
page
something
is that on?
looking. I remember writing it. I just don't remember what page it's on.
Okay. I'm sorry. Don't worry.
That's okay. That's okay. I'll find it real quick because that's important. It's 636, page 119.
119.
Let me double check.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. I have it. Yes. There it is. Okay.
Just a paragraph. So our next chapter is chapter 7. This is our chapter for open space. This is where we talk about what's required, the percentage that's required. If I can get back to that chapter. Okay. So just generally, your rural and suburban zoning districts, residential zoning districts, and O&I require 5% recreation space. That's improved space. So something that's designed for people to do something on, and 7.5% open space. So that could be your streams, your wetlands, stuff that can't be used. So 12.5% of land will be set aside as open space. And in your form-based districts, in your no open space required in the industrial districts or downtown. In your residential mixed use and neighborhood mixed use, it's 7.5% open space because we want them to maximize the site with improvements and not green space because it's in urban areas. And then your commercial mixed use is 4% because that's an even more intense style of development. So that will have like a park in the middle of a outdoor mall or something like that. And then there's requirements for what open spaces are permitted. So people don't just get to make something up and call it an open space and it doesn't work. They have to meet specific standards. They have to be located in specific places. And they have to provide minimum amenities in those open spaces. Any questions about this chapter?
So Charlie, I have a few questions.
Yes.
This is Tina. I'm the Parks and Recreation Director here. So this is my chapter. So, but I think my biggest thing, I don't have any problems with the percentages. I know we went through all of that. I think everybody felt good about it. but we're not very consistent, it doesn't seem, between using recreation space or open space. We've got, in a couple of places, I think we've got it as active and passive. In a couple of places, we have it as unimproved open space. It seemed like we were kind of trying to stick with recreation, basically goes back to the active open space. And I can talk with you about this at a different, there are a lot of areas, and some even throughout outside of this chapter. I just want that to be consistent. So I don't want the developer to come in and not understand exactly what space we're referring to.
You're right. And I remember that being a lot of the comments, and it seems like I still missed some. So I'll go through here. Remind me, unimproved space, we were just going to call open space, and improved, we were calling recreation space, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go through and fix that.
Okay.
Keep me honest.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. I appreciate the input.
Yeah, I've got a whole page of notations on that subject.
Okay. Like I said, I missed some. I'll get them right.
Right.
Anything else? Yes.
Charlie, it just looks like there's a reverse letters on the heading for 7.4 on page 156 that required needs the I and the R switch.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. And then going to chapter 8, this is our landscaping chapter. These standards are mostly from the current ordinance. We just added graphics to what the buffers look like. We added tables to make it easier to read what requirements were in each district. So nothing terribly complicated or groundbreaking in this chapter. We have the plant list from you guys already in here. Any questions on the landscaping chapter?
Yeah, 8.7. Okay, under C1, one canopy tree for every 50 linear feet. And on D1, there's a minimum distance of 30 feet between canopy trees. How is that explained?
So
What was that section again?
it's 8.7 street trees.
8.7.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So I think George, what's going on? These two actually work together. In C, it gives you the minimum. Well, let's say the maximum space that trees can be apart in the street. So one can you have to be at least you can be no more than 50 feet apart. Right,
and then section, though, it says a minimum of 30.
That's right. So those are this different. So you have to have a tree at least every 50 feet. But if you're going to plant a canopy tree and then a different kind of tree that gets a different spacing, you still have to have a tree every 50 feet. Well,
both of these are talking about a canopy tree.
Yeah, I'll clean this section up. I see the confusion because I'm having trouble explaining it. I think probably I'll just get rid of D or combine C and D so they make more sense.
I see it the way that it is that on C, you must have at least 50, you cannot have more than 50 feet between trees. on D, you must have at least 30 feet between canopy trees to avoid problems with their roots and their canopies. Is that it?
That's the idea. Yeah, but
So
if it takes-
maybe,
if it takes that long to figure it out, I probably need to work on the language here.
so maybe it's just a question of having a maximum under C, saying there is allowed no more than 50 feet
Yeah.
between
Is that the
trees.
same thing as a minimum of 30?
No, so
You're
you
saying
could.
no more than, that also means minimum.
So what I'm thinking is I'll just combine C and D, and C will start with the beginning of D, and that'll be the spacing for each type of tree. And then number 1 under C will say, in no circumstance shall trees be greater than 50 feet apart. And then go to number 2, and then I think that's taken care of.
Yeah, that'll make more sense,
I'll
I
do
think.
a
I
quick
agree.
on page, I think it's 179 of the PDF, 8.4.2. We had discussed adding a chart, a rate of credit chart from, I think it may have been from like the Wake Forest document. And it looks like the chart's missing. I'm not sure if that information is covered in B or if we're actually missing the chart.
What chart are we talking about?
It was a rate of credit chart. So I think it showed, and I don't have that in front of me. I think it just had a little bit more information on how much credit you would get for trees in the buffer yard, what types of trees and that sort of thing. And I can probably go back, and Cheryl might have it too. I'm utilizing all of my screens right now, but I can't with all of my open documents.
Yeah, send me what you're talking about, because it don't look like I have a table for replacement for credit. If you can dig that up and send it to me, I can put it in here. I think I know which one you're talking about, but don't look like it made this draft. Okay, anything else on the landscaping chapter? All right, chapter 9, parking and driveways. So a couple things about this chapter. The idea here is our old development regulations everywhere, we gave a minimum parking requirement that was based on very large numbers. Like Walmart's were parked for Black Fridays. We had just giant parking lots for things that didn't need it. So generally and overall in the planning world, the move has been to reduce the minimum parking required. And most developers are fine with that. They don't. So, but the new parking standards you'll see are probably drastically reduced from what you guys require now. But they're more in line with the market and what the market looks for when they develop a new site. So these new parking standards are based on the market generally. And you can see there's some requirements, some uses that we don't even have parking requirements, we let them set it. So that's a change. And then another change is maybe I'm not remembering quickly here. Just a second. Yeah, another change, because form-based districts are new, in a form-based district, parking cannot be located between the building and the street. We want the parking behind the street because, again, the most important thing is how the building relates to the public realm. So just so you know, if somebody comes in with a CMU district, all the parking can be behind the building. You won't be able to see it from the street.
Will that not require a business that has handicap accessibility have to have a back door for handicap?
It does. It basically requires two fronts on a building. But that's developers who do mixed use form-based development. They're okay with that. That's something they know they have to do. It works for them just like it works for the city. So
I know the chapter exempts the downtown, the CBD, from all minimum parking requirements.
that's right.
And so for uses like hotels and multifamily that are permitted by right without standards, is there, and we don't allow freestanding parking structures in the CBD. So I'm wondering if we need to think about making that mesh a little bit.
Okay.
I don't see a way that we can try to put parking downtown that doesn't run up. This is what we need. They need to be exempt from minimums because everybody parks all over downtown. But I think all of those things together, we might want to look at those things. Those are high parking generators, multifamily and hotels that are permitted by right. And then I'm pretty sure it says parking structures as a free, or parking lots as a freestanding use are no longer going to be permitted by right.
As a principal use. So that
As
would
a principal use, right.
So,
right.
and that's a for-profit parking lot. That wouldn't be if the town put in a parking structure.
Sure.
But,
all right.
So
but a parking deck would not be allowed. Okay.
It would actually, a parking deck would be allowed. If a hotel wants to go in, they've got 150 rooms downtown and they're on 3 acres and they can't park all those people. They want to build a 3-story parking deck. They can do that. It's not a principal use. That's associated with the hotel.
But they can't be required to put any parking at all in.
That's right. And so we may want, you're right, maybe there's something, maybe there's a trigger. If you would have been required 50 spaces, then you are required to put in your parking or something like that. I don't know. Maybe.
Well, yeah, I think the city should consider whether they want it as a permitted use without any standards or any requirements. That's my thought. That's a heavy duty use downtown. Yeah. Anyway, that's the thought.
Okay.
So Lori, what you're saying is that if we are allowing hotels to go by right, in the downtown district, what you're suggesting is it should be changed to a permitted with standards.
Yes, or even a special use that would require site planning and some consideration of those things.
Well, we can't do special uses after July. So we'd have to conditional district it somehow.
Right.
It may be something to consider, and you guys can let me know. It may be that we limit the room size or the number of rooms in the hotel downtown. Maybe we say you're only allowed to have a 50-room hotel downtown.
We do have 2 categories for it in the zoning ordinance.
We do.
Yeah. But I want to make sure, but they wouldn't be allowed to apply as a special use permit use?
No, special uses are not legal after July.
So everything in the ordinance that's now SUP, we're going to eliminate as SUP?
That's right. That's right. It'll be a conditional district. Actually, I'm sorry. SUPs are allowed. It's the special use districts that's not allowed.
Right. So could we make it a special use permit use?
Yes, we could. Yeah, we could.
That way we get a site plan and all that good stuff. It's a thought. It's a thought.
I'll make a note and wait for input on that one.
I think, again, that's where our downtown business owners might have an input on the board.
All right. Moving to chapter 10, it's our site and street lighting and our signage chapter. Lighting is fairly new. These are provide way more input for the reader than what was provided previously. It does require LED lights, which everybody's doing now anyway, so it's not a big deal. And limits to height. Signage, we added graphics and tables to try to make it cleaner. And I don't know if you guys know, but the Supreme Court several years ago passed down a decision about temporary signage that said that different types of temporary signs, meaning a church sign and a realtor sign, cannot be treated differently by local regulations, which pretty much required everybody to rewrite all of their signage regulations. And so you'll see that in this chapter when it relates to temporary signs, that specific section is very small because we can't split out different types of temporary signage.
What page does the temporary sign section start on? Oh,
It's a really short section. It's like one paragraph in the table. It's the bottom of page 205.
Got it.
Okay,
thank you.
no problem.
Oh, I was looking under 10.2.2 exemptions. It says that under, let's see, lighting of U.S. and North Carolina flags, provided that the flag standard does not exceed the maximum permitted building height in the zoning district in which it's located. I'm not sure it's going to be constitutional for us to just say U.S. and North Carolina flag. If John Tovey wants a British flag, I don't know if we can stop him from doing that. Just to give my opinion on that.
Should we say lighting of the U.S., North Carolina, or other national flags? Or there, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure you can even say national flags because then that can get into a question if you want a South Carolina flag, or if there's a flag, don't tread on me flag or something like that. I mean, you can leave it in there, but I'm just saying that we might run into some constitutional issues on that.
You do have the POWMIA flag.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, we could take it out and not address it at all. Let it just be a policy thing. But I can say I've been doing this for 18 years. I've never had anybody.
Right. And I understand. It's like I say, it's one of those things. I'm just saying as a legal standpoint, as the attorney, that I don't think that would pass constitutional muster if someone challenged it down the line.
Could just change it to flags.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the problem would be
all districts. This covers downtown, CBD, covers residential.
Yeah, but what if Aaron's wants to put up a 35-foot flag in downtown?
That's right.
That's the thing we want to avoid. Yeah, we want to avoid commercial flags.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually got the American flag flying on my garage.
I'm glad, John. I'm glad to hear that. Well, I know my neighbor across the street has a flagpole and he has the light on it. So Tommy Daniel. So.
Right.
Any other questions about the lighting standards? Okay. Any questions about signage standards?
So what's the decision on the flags?
Personally, I would leave it alone. I'm not sure it's a huge deal, but I work for you guys, so you tell me.
And I'm just saying, as your lawyer, I'm just saying that you might run into an issue that in the future, but I don't see any problem with leaving it in there. It's just something that you might just want to be aware of if a challenge comes up to it.
All right.
I have one question about signage specific to the previous chapter where we talked about parking, and that parking has to be at the back of the building.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any clarity when you do signage, what is considered the front of the building or the back of the building when the parking is mandated to the back?
It's the street. The ordinance talks about the part of the building that faces the street is the front. And buildings can have 2 fronts. They can have 3 fronts. You can even have a building with 4 fronts.
So in that instance, you would have a building that would say have 2 fronts, one that traffic going by could see that sign, and the traffic going in the back door could see a different sign.
Yes.
Okay. So we've taken care of that in this particular ordinance.
Yes, ma'am. And we don't limit the number of signs you can have. We just give you a square footage allotment and you can split it up how you want to. So if they've got, 180 square feet of signage they're allowed, and they've got 3 building faces to put it on where traffic comes by, then they just, split it up however it works for them. This is a pretty flexible sign ordinance.
So that would be 180 collective.
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, I take that back. It would be 30% of each wall. So if you've got a 100-foot wall, you get 30 feet. Whatever this wall is, you get that many. Any other questions on signage? All right, we're getting there, guys, I promise. Chapter 11, Stormwater Management and Erosion Control. This is pretty much a carryover. I think engineering had some things they wanted us to add. I'm not an engineer, so I could not speak to what works and what doesn't work in this section. But I'll gladly take any comments you guys have.
It's
I may get back with you on, this is Amy, the city engineer. I may get back with you on some comments on chapter 6 and on the stormwater. There's some changes occurring with some aspects on both, but I know I haven't been a big participant in this project so far, but would like to double check on those 2 chapters.
Okay. Absolutely. I'll take whatever you can give me.
All right, appreciate.
We do appreciate Daryl's participation.
He has been my delegated representative, and he's brought me some questions that I have not fully answered, which is why I said I want to double check them.
Right, appreciate it.
Glad to be there.
Okay, chapter 12 is our flood damage prevention ordinance. And I don't believe there's anything groundbreaking or new in here.
And what ordinance? I'm sorry.
The flood damage prevention.
Yeah, we had just adopted the ordinance last year, and so we just went with what we just adopted, being that the state approved it.
So you basically just want to check it for typos, which I think the committee's already done. Okay, moving on to chapter 13. This is nonconformity. So this is where we talk about things that don't meet the regulations in this chapter. Are they allowed to continue? How are they allowed to continue? When do they have to be replaced? So that's what this chapter is.
right.
And we allow everything to continue. We're not trying to amortize any uses in the city. So
My question, Charlie, I think I raised earlier in writing, but I have a concern about single family uses in the CBD and the O&I district that no longer will be permitted, and depends on the map, I get that, but someone with a single family house whose house is no longer conforming, of course, can continue to have a house under this ordinance, but can they repair it if more than 50% of it burns? Can I assure a title lender that they have a ability to have that house there if something happens to it?
yeah, so
Okay.
if you look
Where is that in the ordinance?
It's chapter 13. If you look in 13, let's see, non-conforming. If it's a non-conforming structure because it's not allowed by use, in 13.5 E4, it says shall constitute discontinuance unless the owner requests a return. Actually, that's not it either. I feel like there's something in here. Let me find it.
Yeah, and I don't, that's just a concern because I find it affects mostly that issue because now in our O&I and our CBD, there are some small areas if we translate B1 and O&I directly, that single-family houses will be non-conforming uses. And I just want to be sure we're very careful. That's all.
Yeah, typically when in this chapter, I put in that single family homes are exempt from the damage and destruction requirements because it just makes everybody's life easier. It looks like I didn't put it in here, so I'll put that in here.
And I just think that helps because we're hoping, I think by zoning them the way we do that, they'll eventually convert maybe to some cool house type businesses, right? But I hate to see them not be able to rebuild if they
I
die.
think 13.7 addresses this. It gives a percentage, no more than 20% of the current assessed value can be done in repair or replacement.
Yeah, and usually
Further says if it's 100% loss, which burned to the ground, then it shall not be reconstructed.
Right. And my question is, do we want that? Yeah.
typically though, what I'll say is, and this is based on some experience I had when I worked in the public sector, it is really hard to get a call from a homeowner who lived in a single family house that's been on the same lot for 150 years, and all of a sudden something happens and they can't use the lot for what they were using it for anymore. In 13, in this chapter, usually I put in an exemption for single family lots or single family structures because it's just a single family house. We're not terribly concerned if they keep going. So if everybody's okay with that, I would just put that in because it's not in here. There's no exemption for single family structures.
Yes, it's not that many houses that we have. I would say we wouldn't have any more than maybe 7, but it would be good to go ahead and put that in.
Okay, I'll get that in there.
You have to protect those poor people
That's right.
So yeah, I would put
We're the ones that made them non-conforming. They didn't do anything themselves. So chapter 14, administrative agencies. This just gives the explanation of every board and town staff function. So planning board, board of commissioners, board of adjustment, and then the administrator and technical review committee. So in this ordinance, you may have noticed we don't ever call out a specific staff position like planning director or zoning enforcement officer because those titles might change. The function might change. So we just call anybody who does anything related to the enforcement of this ordinance the administrator. Ultimately, the administrator is the town manager, but it's also his assigned. So anybody who enforces this is the administrator. And so the administrator's duties are defined in chapter 14, along with the Historic Preservation Commission, and then some more information on designation of districts. So that's chapter 14. Most of that's carried over from the current ordinance. In chapter 15, we talk about the specific development processes. So if you want to get a special use permit, this is the process you go through. If it's a conditional district, this is your process, is what you have to submit. So that's all in chapter 15. Any questions on chapter 15? It's pretty dry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then chapter 16 is violations of code enforcement. It's essentially the same ordinance you have now, just cleaned up a little bit. And then chapter 17 is the definitions. I've got one definition I need to add. From today's discussion. But that is all 338 pages of the new UDO.
Yay.
It only took an hour and a half to get through.
So I would encourage everyone to continue to look through and see if you have seen the changes that we need to address before the next meeting.
Yeah, so when is the next meeting? Will it be this time in March?
It will be.
Okay, so if everybody could get me their comments in, say, a week, then I can make all the changes to the chapters and get it back out to you for re-review to make sure we're set. Then in March, planning board can look at it and send it on to council, and we'll finally be done.
Are there any other questions?
I had one, and it's going back, it's a fairly straightforward one, going back to chapter 2 on the table of conservation development standards that's on page 13 of the actual document. There's a nice little graphic that we had that illustrates the distinction between conservation development and traditional development. And there's room on the page. Is it possible for us to flip that little graphic in there?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. Is that in the zoning ordinance now?
No, it is
Cheryl,
not.
Cheryl, could you send me that graphic and I'll drop it in here? Do you have it?
Or otherwise I'll send it, Cheryl, if you don't have it.
If you would, please.
I would happily. Thank you.
Any other questions for Charlie?
That graphic goes on page 13, right?
Yes,
Yep.
ma'am.
Okay, yeah, I remember.
At the
Yeah.
bottom of page that starts with
13.
2.3.4.
Yeah, I've got it, yeah. I had made myself a note about that too, and I missed it because I was late getting in the meeting, yeah. Okay.
So at this time, I'm gonna recognize our planning board chair, David Wicker. He hadn't got on when we started. Do you have any comments? You muted.
Yeah, I saw that. I love these Zoom meetings. You talk 3 or 4 minutes before you realize no one can hear you. I do appreciate the detail that we went through tonight. It is very long and it is very arduous, and I appreciate the attention each of the members have paid and the assistance given by members of the city council and Madam Mayor, you yourself as well. Ms. Hart, I was looking to see if we had a quorum since I joined about 5 minutes late. I wasn't sure if you'd approved the meeting minutes from the last meeting or not, or whether you wanted to carry those over.
No, we could go ahead and approve them. That'll be something we won't have to do. But before we do so, I do want to recognize the elected officials included on this meeting. Commissioner Bullock, who was part of the committee. I think Commissioner Geary was on, and I'm not sure if she's still here, and Commissioner Toby.
He's still
And
here.
of course, the mayor, want to thank them for their participation. They've been active from the beginning. And also want to thank all the other committee members that are here and who worked so hard and been active from the beginning.
Thank you.
It's a fun job, isn't it, guys?
It's,
Oh, yes.
it's been a learning experience. It's,
Yes, sir.
It has.
it's good.
Very important.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I've only one thing, if I can go back to chapter 9. We're looking at 9.4.1. There's a chart that has the minimum parking requirements. I made a notation while we were discussing that about adding the recreation facility onto that chart. There's nothing on the parking about minimum parking for recreation facilities. So I just made a notation at the time we were talking about it to add that.
In the minimum parking table for
Yeah,
outdoor
minimum
recreational
parking.
services?
Yeah. Can we do that or we discuss it another time?
9.4.1.
Yeah, it's
what
a
you said,
chart.
okay.
It's just a table. It's a
Okay.
table of the
Yes.
categories.
Yeah, I'm
Gotcha.
trying to, yep, it definitely needs to be in there.
Recreation facility is not in there. So
Yep.
I think I made a note that we should add that.
Okay, I'll add that in there.
Thank you.
It's on you, the chair.
Thank you, Ms. Hart. Who I recognized was, I am present, Mr. Thomas was present, Ms. Edwards was present, Mr. Summers was present, Mr. Woodruff was present, Ms. Gilligan was present, and Mr. Kinlow was present, along with the planning board director and our counsel, Chance Wilkerson. Ms. Hart, does that give us a quorum?
It does.
All right, then we will proceed, and other than review of the new chapter, I have two other items on here. The first one is going to be for the approval of the minutes from our February 22 meeting. I'm sorry, from our January 25 meeting. And has everyone had an opportunity to review those minutes?
I have.
Yes.
Is there any action that the board would like to take?
I'd like to make a motion that it passes.
There's a motion to approve the minutes that have been recorded. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ms. Hart, that carries unanimously. The only other new business I had was Mr. Yoakley's discussion with the UDO, and I believe we've completed that. Is there anything else that you have for us, Ms. Hart?
That was it. Again, if we can get those comments in so we can make the edits.
Okay.
When you say get the comments in, you talking about the ones that were brought up or just ones that people think need to be added?
If we can have whatever additional comments that we may have.
If you read through it over the next week, because you love it so much, whatever you find that you don't think works, or there's a typo, any concerns you have, just whatever you got, we'll take them and
So that's
figure out what
other
to do
than
with
the-
them.
other than the issues brought up here tonight.
Right. I've got the ones we talked about tonight.
Is there anyone else on this meeting that would like to make any comments before we close out?
I'll just say this is much more fun as a Zoom than it is as a telephone meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like Zoom. But
Oh,
I
you-
think
I
I
do.
would like to thank Cheryl Hart for facilitating the whole process, this UDO that's been going on for something like 18 months now, I believe the committee's been meeting. I want to thank Cheryl for allowing us to be part of it. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think we're done.
All right, if there's nothing further, then we will be adjourned until our next meeting. Ms. Hart, do you know if we have anything for the March meeting?
I think I have a subdivision, one lot subdivision, but I don't think we have anything else.
Okay, then I hope to see you in March. I assume we'll still be meeting by Zoom at that time, and that's good and bad, but I look forward when we can be together in person.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good evening, you all. Good night.
Good night.
Right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.